T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff. 30 minutes after the launch.
Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy, the show where we review AWS announcements. We take your questions. We have interviews with AWS and community guests. I'm Stephen Barr.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and this is episode number 91.
Unbelievable. We're coming up on that 100.
We have to schedule a very special 100th episode that's coming up in 9 weeks.
I can't
or
less,
sooner.
because we're doing 2 per week. I think
Correct.
what we need to do is we need to have a certain set of questions that we ask every participant, because I was thinking about how to do, a big group channel, but we've had a lot of guests.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
This is definitely going to be a logistical nightmare if we brought everyone in all at the same time. Even just coordinating times is going to be really hard. But let's see. We'll plan out something special for that particular episode. But another episode that we just had was a conversation with Taranjeet. If you haven't checked that out, Taranjeet is the CEO of Embed Chain. They've been doing some amazing stuff. We had an amazing conversation with him on Friday. So if you haven't checked that out yet, please do. We hope to bring you such amazing conversations more often.
Yeah, it has. Well, I mean, and the RAG space is just moving at breakneck speed. So it's really neat to be able to talk to him and to see how they're making RAGs easier to use for everyone without dealing with some of the nitty gritty details. There's so much there.
Correct. I mean, just in the last few days, there've been so many amazing announcements around enhancement of the different LLMs and the context windows and stuff like that. There's just so much to cover, and I think the conversation with Taranjeet was just amazingly set up for just when some of these announcements came about. So yeah, check it out if you haven't already.
Yeah. Well, speaking of announcements, so last week there was a big one of Sora. I'm going to put this on screen. That was huge. Creating video from text. So we had ChatGPT where you could ask it a question. It's a chat bot. Then we had things like Dolly and Midjourney where you could generate a static image from a prompt.
Yeah.
And that was based in the Stable Diffusion. And now Sora, you can generate video from text.
Correct.
This one,
And it's really amazing. If you look at the samples of videos that they created, they are photorealistic. They are like, unless you really dig into the details of every one of those videos, you'll see some markers that show that it's AI generated. I think it's going to start becoming really hard to distinguish between what is AI generated and what is not. Like if you just look at the kind of videos we were reviewing 6 months to a year ago, they seemed almost amateurish compared to what they are able to produce today. And
well, look, this woman walking down the city, and look at the reflection on the pavement of the city lights in the puddles. That
Correct.
looks really realistic, and the camera angle is really good. And the way that see that now the camera's panning over,
yeah,
that's really done well. Let's see.
correct.
What else
And in that one, unless you're looking really closely, where some of the folks in the background look like they're floating as they're walking, like you wouldn't be able to make out that this is not shot in or this was not created by an AI. It's fascinating what they were able to do here.
And what else is neat is they've been able to make it consistent across multiple camera angles. So see this big zoom into her face. That was all one prompt. That wasn't multiple prompts and trying to get the same character in each prompt. That was
Correct.
one prompt. So let's have a look at this other one. Elephants. Okay, several giant.
These are mammoths. Yeah. This is absolutely fascinating.
So apparently they've given access to several early adopters. They're calling them red teamers, and these red teamers are showing.
Actually, red teamers are internal folks at OpenAI who are trying to break the system. So they are testing this system to the absolute limit. and trying to figure out where it gets dangerous, where it doesn't, and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. In fact, there's an interesting section on the page that actually talks about the things that don't work. There's a video of a person. I think the prompt was show someone running on the treadmill, and the person is actually running in the opposite direction on the treadmill. So there are a bunch of stuff that doesn't really work. There's one about where pups are appearing and disappearing, out of thin air, which is also quite interesting.
Well, look at this one. This one has I was watching this one with the kids last night. Pay attention to the woman's right hand.
Yeah.
And this spoon materializes, and then now it's vanished. The spoon is vanished back into the mashed potatoes.
What truth?
There is no spoon.
Yeah, there's another one on the side which has a grandmother kind of celebrating her birthday and everyone around. And if you start noticing hands, the hands are kind of all messed up. I think the generative AI is still struggling to deal with hands at this point.
Did you see the pirate ships in a coffee cup?
I haven't seen that one.
Okay, this one's this is really cool. So the prompt was show two pirates battling in a cup of coffee. And what people are commenting on is the realistic physics. So there's a continuity of the ships look like they're doing the right thing relative to the waves. And you also see the awareness of the coffee with the surface tension on the edge of the cup. And you see the foam bubbles that wouldn't necessarily be in an ocean, but would be in a cup of coffee. Right. It looks like a stirred up coffee cup.
Correct. No, this stuff is fascinating, and I can't imagine what the state of this AI is going to be in another 3 to 6 months. So right now, we're still awaiting public release, where access is granted more broadly. They are still red teaming it at the moment, and a few handpicked customers have been given access to it to just figure out what works and what doesn't. But definitely very, very exciting times for video generation. That said, there's also another very big announcement that happened just a few hours before this one, and that was the launch of Gemini 1.5 Pro by Google. Can we bring that announcement up? Because that's quite an incredible announcement as well. Here they have actually run it with 1 million tokens in a context window. And this is literally like giving it a 1-hour video to review, which has not been possible at all given the constraints we have today. And it seems like, the performance of this particular model is head and shoulders above anything else that we've seen in the past.
Well, they said, it can summarize the transcript of the entire Apollo 11 mission or a silent 44-minute Buster Keaton film in full.
Yep.
Interesting metrics, but that's given the original chat, or even thinking back to ChatGPT, 3.5, right, where you could just copy.
We started with 4K windows or 1K windows.
Yeah, a big chunk of code can easily overwhelm your context buffer, and so now 1 million token.
Correct. And the amazing thing about this particular model is, if you look at the needle in the haystack tests, which is basically in a very large context window, one of the biggest problems that you suffer from is the fact that details that are in the middle of the massive context invariably get lost. And these models have been doing an amazing job with the needle in the haystack test as well. I think it's scored like 99.5 something percent, which is pretty awesome with 1 million token context window. I mean, that's just, astounding, the level of detail that it's able to go find within that window.
Well, I think what's neat is we're already judging it in a way that, like we said, is more than what we judge ourselves, right? Are we good at finding a needle in a 1 million word or 1 million token haystack? And probably not especially if we only had a second to read it. With 1 million token context window, how does this change the way you see possible uses of it? I mean, one thing that I see is you can have an untrained model look at huge code bases now. So a million. I mean, it's not going to be the Windows kernel or the Linux kernel, but small to mid-sized projects would fit well within 1 million tokens.
Yeah, you should think of 1 million tokens as something to the tune of about 400,000 lines of code or 500,000 lines of code. That would roughly summarize 1 million tokens, and that is in itself pretty incredible. The fact that you can actually take your code bases and do those kind of analysis is pretty awesome. The other area where I actually see massive use is video analysis. As it stands today, video analysis is nearly impossible, or it's very rudimentary with the existing LLMs, because you basically have to break down a particular video down to low resolution frames, which are about 720 by 1024 pixels roughly. And no matter, so if you're doing screencasts or high resolution video, you really cannot process it with the current LLMs, and then just the bandwidth, the throughputs, all of those are going to be constraints. But if you can pack them all into one single query, you can pack up a half an hour, a 20-minute, or a fairly large snippet of video into that amount of time, then I think the opportunities are going to be endless. The amount of data that today resides in videos and the kind of analysis you need out of it is phenomenal.
Well, hopefully, analyze this very video, because there's some great data, some great context in here, and like the previous strategies involve chunking, right? So you take the video, you'd break it up into maybe 2-minute segments, but except for our 60-second news reviews, we'd have context that is more overarching than what could happen to fit in a segment. And plus, you don't know if your 2-minute segment lines up with your chunking strategy's 2-minute segment, and so then you'll do partial overlap. So you'll say, I want to do 2-minute segments, but with 30-second overlaps. So in a 60-minute video, you would need like 75 different chunks so that you have the overlap works out.
Correct.
But even then, you don't know if did we have a 5-minute discussion here and a 30-second discussion here, and how do you merge the context correctly? And then you have a part of the model that will then summarize all the pieces, but it gets pretty coarse pretty quickly.
Yeah, it does. And I think you keep tweaking the chunking strategies to find something that's optimal for your data sets, but it's always hard. Anytime you have to break up, something that's contiguous, like imagine watching Oppenheimer or a movie like that, in little chunks where advertisements are kind of interspersed every 2 or 3 minutes. Like, you'd lose content. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You don't know where to cut. You just couldn't do it. So I think having larger context windows is inevitable, and the fact that some of these newer models, I mean, we've seen the context windows grow drastically just over the last 6 months. We are now at 200K. Claude now has 200K tokens as the context window today. With Gemini 1.5 Pro, it's now gone up to 1 million. So I think you're just going to see this repeated across the board. The only thing that I worry about and I question is, what does this do on the compute front of it? So today, we are very severely limited by the tokens per minute that you can process, or tokens per second that you can process. And if you have massive token windows like this, what does it do to latencies? What does it do to the time it takes to actually compute all of this down? So that would be an interesting analysis. I'd love to see what it does to latency.
And I would love to see more intelligent chunking strategies that could, for example, you could have an LLM, so say for a video, you could have an LLM look at the transcript and figure out, okay, where do I break it evenly? So if you're looking at a play, you can think Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and break it at those points. And then you could figure that out from the transcript, which would fit into 1 million tokens. And then you could put in the whole video into each 1 million token chunk, or pretty soon it'll be 2 million token chunk.
Yeah. Correct.
And in 5 years, are we going to be worrying about this? Or is it going to be the way we think about, I don't know, think about RAM now, where most people just
Yeah,
don't
I
think.
think this is going to follow the same story as RAM, in terms
So,
of it not being very relevant.
so
Though,
enthusiasts will
yeah,
care, but the average user won't even know about it.
correct. But here's the thing. About 5 years ago, the way we would think about compute power, we would think about it as how many CPU cores are available to process whatever you need to process, because the unit of processing was one CPU core. In the new world, the processing is being computed in terms of tokens per second. So you're going to start seeing providers, you know, measure their capacities and there's, available compute in terms of number of tokens per second that are available.
Just like in gaming, right? It is, does your favorite game run at this frame rate at this resolution?
Correct.
Who cares about what the CPU and the GPU can do? It's like, what's the end product? And in this case,
Correct.
the end product is going to be tokens per second, and CPUs are going to be rated on that basis.
Correct. So I actually see this big race that's currently underway in terms of building the highest capacity for the tokens per second that you can process. So the other big thing that just happened over the course of the last week was the World Government Summit that was held in Dubai, the UAE, and it had the who's who of the AI world talking about the future of AI and how it's changing the world, including folks like Sam Altman and the head of AI from Meta. Some very, very interesting stats that came out of this. So the head of Meta, the head of AI for Meta, came up and said that Meta is probably going to have something like 600,000 GPUs available within their data center to create foundational models, which is staggering.
It's a 2-year waiting list today to get access to some of these GPUs from these manufacturers and vendors.
Yeah, that's true, and it's in part due to companies like Meta and Microsoft, which are the two biggest buyers of GPUs from NVIDIA. Most people actually rent GPUs out of cloud service providers, right? They don't necessarily have their own facilities. But to give you an idea, by the end of the year, Mark Zuckerberg announced that Meta will basically have access to 600,000 GPUs. Many of them are used for research and development, but most of them are actually used for production.
Okay, and they said something to the tune of, it takes about $1 billion to create a foundational model, and chip shortage is going to be a big part of how fast this all grows. And in the middle of all of that, Sam Altman, of course, asked for something to the tune of $5 to $7 trillion to solve that particular problem.
I saved the actual paper article here. One of our friends said, well, what is this app that prints out the news on paper for you? Yeah, OpenAI seeks trillions for chips. AI push. This is the same article here. Sometimes they change the title after the fact. Sam Altman seeks trillions of dollars to reshape business of chips and AI. The link will be in the description. I love how it gave the comparison. This is the value of Apple and Microsoft put together.
Yeah, correct. And to think of that much money, and $7 trillion is not, and it's not a trivial sum of money. But when you really think about it, there are two companies together that cover all of it. Two companies that have how many around the world? It seems like a very skewed, weighted, valuation of companies around the world.
Well, I think it was great timing to release Sora just as you're talking about. You need a $7 trillion. Like, the timing couldn't have been better. Well, okay, this is if you look at Sam Altman's Twitter feed, Sam A. He's never one to mince words. I think this one here, which I can just let the readers view it. He's confident that he can use that money.
And I think the next one was also an interesting message where it says, our comms and legal teams love me so much.
Well, but then you think about, okay, the amount of hardware and the amount of, let's see, like you said, the amount of infrastructure, the power, the jobs that this is going to create, is it that implausible? This is definitely going to be the future. There's no way back from this.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the US, right? I mean, their annual budget is what, $1 trillion plus. It's about 1.2 or 1.3 trillion, if I'm not mistaken. Just the budget, the government budget. I can imagine, across the world, the spend accumulating up to over $1 trillion over a 5-year period or a 10-year period. That seems very plausible. 7 trillion over 10 years of investment is 700 billion a year across the entire globe. And that seems not impossible.
Well, and especially for something as capital intensive as semiconductor fabrication, where you need these really expensive machines, you need a highly trained and skilled workforce, you have a lot of complicated processes and procedures and a very deep supply chain to get all the right, I guess, the gold and the silicon, all this stuff. It's plausible.
Yeah, I think this is even more important than that. It's like, at one point of time, the US decided that it needed a major infrastructure push, and it invested, hundreds of billions on building the highway network and the road network in the US. They built dams, they built a whole lot of infrastructure that really, gave the economy a massive impetus for about half a century, right? This is one of those game-changing moments where the world has to decide. And funnily enough, I think by and large, globally, everyone has the same standing today when it comes to being able to leverage this technology and use it to further their ambitions. If a small country like the UAE, which is literally a speck in the global landscape in terms of, the overall, contribution to commerce and stuff like that, if they can make those kind of investments, I think almost every other country can do so as well, because it really is a game changer in the long run.
Well, and it's interesting positioning for, I was reading at the end of the article, it was talking about Abu Dhabi wanting to become a regional center of AI.
Yeah.
From Dubai to Abu Dhabi is what, a 90-minute drive?
It's actually a 40-minute drive. It's not even a 90-minute drive.
I guess it depends on what car you have.
No, it's just, it's actually really, they're bordering each other. So technically you just cross the border.
Oh, I guess it meant from city to city, right? So state to state there.
It's, no, I mean, end to end, you can go from city center to city center in about, I'd say, an hour max.
Okay.
It's really that close. And and it's, and in fact, Abu Dhabi has been one of the leading investors in, or creators of the Alcon model, which is one of the big open source, very popular models out there. So it's, they're definitely way into AI. The way AI is reshaping how government services are being delivered is absolutely fascinating. And Dubai, in fact, has been one of those places which has been at the forefront of driving big governmental changes using technology. And having lived in Dubai for 13 odd years, it's been a fascinating, journey that I've seen that city and the entire country go through. I'd love to see that replicated everywhere else.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. I'm glad that we're going to have different countries trying different models, right? Because each one is going to have pros and cons, and we're going to just have to. That's where we have this big experiment, I suppose.
Yeah. And the other conversation that's really at the top of everyone's mind is what they're calling AI sovereignty, which is every country will want to have their own AI models that are not be beholden to another country and their models and the biases that those bring in. And so you will start seeing a lot of governments starting to invest in building their own AI models. Now, that's already happening in India. That's already happening in a whole lot of other countries like the UAE. And I think that's going to be a trend.
AI sovereignty is on a national level, but then would you want it on a state level or on a neighborhood level? Or how local would you want this? or yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be AIs that could reflect people's, I don't know, political biases or whatever that would.
Yeah.
So hopefully AIs don't turn into echo chambers.
Correct.
I'm sure you could train one to only tell you what you want to hear, which in a sense social media has done to us anyway.
Yes, it's definitely going to be a very, very interesting space, but this is literally the space to be in. If you're not innovating in AI today, I think you're missing out on the biggest opportunity that exists in front of us. So this is going to be the space. We are going to be all over it. So stay tuned for more on this.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's switch gears for a second. Well, we have our 60-second news reviews. All right. AWS Control Tower introduces APIs to register organizational units. Let's have a review of this one. Rahul, what's the impact of these Control Tower APIs? How are people doing it before? And obviously, we want APIs. We're programmers. APIs to do something is better than any other way. How are people doing it before, and how is this going to improve process?
Okay, so quick summary of Control Tower. Control Tower basically allows you to set up certain policies and governance models centrally for your entire organization. And you could till now only add organizational units to it that inherit all of those governance capabilities in the AWS console. Today, with this launch, or last week with this launch, the new capability that is now available to us is the fact that you can now, using API, take all the different OUs or organizational units and add them to Control Tower. So they immediately inherit these baselines or these governance models, the IAM roles, CloudTrail, all of that stuff really, really easily. So I definitely call this a simplifies, and I would give this a 4 cloud.
Okay, so just thinking about this one for a moment. I know we've ran past the timer, but that was for the more in-depth discussion. So if you were using Control Tower, you could, so say you were, okay, well, take an example from my past. It was a healthcare organization. So maybe you have, within that, you have the production organization, which needs very strict rules on auditing, on compliance. But if you have an app dev organization within that, you could have more relaxed policies. Is that what you could use this for?
Yeah. So let me give you a more concrete example. So using Control Tower, you could actually have a policy at the organizational level that sets up your permission boundaries. So it says that no matter what you do within the accounts, you are not allowed to create roles or IAM roles or permissions for users that exceed these permission boundaries, right? And that you can roll out to every OU so that no matter what they try to do in those accounts, they can never exceed what is set centrally. And so rules like that, for example, will ensure that you have all the governance set up by default across the board without anyone being able to override it.
Okay, so you can kind of define the maximal IAM permissions that can be utilized.
That is one. Correct.
Okay,
so that's one
so
such
you
example.
Make yourself, I don't know, */* within IAM. It's not going to work.
Correct. You might still have an overriding permission boundary set up by Control Tower that basically is centralized, and that will override your permissions. Another example of something like this is you could potentially, set up a rule that says that you're not allowed to launch a resource unless tags are available for it, right? And this is one of those very foundational FinOps practices about making sure that you tag everything that you launch, because a lot of organizations don't know how to do FinOps accounting because they don't have tags in place. So you can ensure that any new resource that gets launched is not allowed to launch unless tags are in place. That's another example of Control Tower, rules being, or baselines being rolled out across all OUs.
And that's one of those things where it's so easy to say, "Oh, I'll fix it up later. We're in a hurry now," but you can't do that. That's how you end up with, as you termed it, FinOps debt.
Correct.
And you can't do that. That it's always worth it to just pay the price up front.
Correct.
All right, that is AWS Control Tower now registering OUs. I like the idea of reducing friction, because if there's high friction, then you're going to take a shortcut, and then eventually you have something to clean up. Whereas I really like this idea of reducing the friction so you do it right the first time.
Exactly.
Okay, we have the next one, which is AWS Document DB. So figured out. I asked my dad about this. Of how do you tell which one is an Amazon service and which one is an AWS service? And he said that Amazon things are finished products, and AWS things are building blocks. But right away, you can think of 10 exceptions in each direction. So it's not completely consistently applied. But when you write an article that's going to be on the AWS blog, you have to get them all right of which one's Amazon S3, AWS, what's an AWS one? Memcache, which...
Yeah. I mean, Document DB is a building block. I don't think you would think of it as a product.
But it is Amazon Document DB.
Yeah.
Well, I guess AWS EC2, or no, is it Amazon EC2? All right. I'm just going to say what it says because they vetted it. Okay, here we go. Amazon Document DB now supports text search. So this is different than, I know you could always mangle a regular expression. Is this encroaching on OpenSearch's territory? How are people going to use this? What's the target audience of this?
Okay, so just a quick recap. Amazon Document DB is basically a document data store, right? Now, because that's a key value pair and you have JSON objects basically stored in there, without the capabilities of full text search, what you always needed is another OpenSearch cluster that went with it that would actually allow you to do full text search, right? Too much of a headache, too much of an overhead. Now that this feature is supported natively within Document DB, you don't need that OpenSearch cluster to go with it. You can search right in here. And I think for a large number of people, this significantly simplifies their operations related to their deployments. And so I'm going to give this a simplifies and a 4 club.
Excellent. Now I know with Document DB, you can kind of use regular expressions. It's not great. And implementing text search with the regular expressions, that's kind of one of those anti-patterns. And so this kind of pushes the boundary out a bit further onto the side of, when do you want to use OpenSearch versus full text search? I'm guessing there probably is a bit more sophistication in OpenSearch than whatever full text search algorithm this is. But
I think full text search is now generally very well defined and very well practiced. So implementing a new index for all the string data that exists within your documents in the database is a relatively simple exercise. And so I don't think this is a huge technical challenge to implement, but the fact that it's now available along with your regular queries and you can search through them through more powerful mechanics of full text search, I think is a big boon to customers.
Yeah, and if this helps you use one database instead of two, and even with zero ETL, you still have the whole cost factor and the whole complexity factor. So one database instead of two, that sounds better.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the next article. Amazon Bedrock Console gets a modern look and feel. So Rahul, how's this changed your usage of Bedrock Console? What do you think of the new and updated Bedrock Console?
Okay, so when we first started, obviously the Bedrock Console was really complicated. It had a whole bunch of different models. It seemed very haphazardly put together. And I think that was a challenge for people who were just getting started. The simple thing where your model access was in a different place and then your base models were in a different place just made it really difficult. And you're getting started, understanding what the models are, what the capabilities are, was all very difficult. So now what they've done is they've basically cleaned up the getting started section, which is, if you look at my screen over here, I think the overview section is a lot cleaner. I don't give AWS max points for their UI and UX capabilities. I think that still has a way to go, but it's way better than it used to be. It's simpler to understand. The sections are clear and you can go straight to the playgrounds from the overview section itself. And they have a section on examples, and these examples are really neat. The prompts are there, the responses are there, API requests, how to make them, all of those details are there for every one of the models. There are a lot of different examples in here that you can leverage. That definitely helps customers get started a lot faster. And then you have the different providers and what they do, all the model description, the model cards, they're all available over here. It gives you all the resources that you need. It gives you API request parameters that you can use. All of this is really great. The playground section, the orchestration section, model access section, all of these pretty much remain the same. You still have to go to a different section called the base models where all of these are available. The model cards are right here. Those haven't changed very much, but it definitely makes it much easier for new customers just getting started on Bedrock.
Well, that model card section, that's going to grow and grow and grow. It's amazing seeing the traffic about these new models. There are new ones released all the time. I'm looking forward to using Olmo by Alan AI2. I don't think that's in there yet, but it's just neat seeing all of the development in this space, looking at the Hugging Face leaderboard. Smog is another one that I want to try.
Yeah. In fact, some of these are very, very exciting new ones that are coming up. So, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this catalog grows over the next few months.
Amazon Workspaces thin client inventory now available to purchase in France, Italy, Germany, and Spain. Now, we talked about Workspaces back at our reInvent wrap-up. We asked Jeff Barr what was his favorite launch, and it was the Workspaces thin client. So
yeah.
It's kind of neat, this article saying there's now inventory out there.
Yeah, I think for large enterprises where you have to buy thousands of laptops and keep upgrading them every couple of years, it's really cost effective. It's really, but yeah, I mean, I think this makes a lot of sense for large enterprises that have to go through massive hardware cycles. So it definitely simplifies their world. And I would give this 3.5.
Neat. Yeah, I wish they would have put a picture of it in the article.
Yes.
I could see that. But I'm glad that they linked to the actual Amazon business page so you can then buy one of these physical devices.
Correct. You can stay up to the most recent and current versions of hardware that you need without really having to go through a massive capex cycle of upgrading all the laptops and all the hardware. And then there's just so much other e-waste that happens with it, where every 2 years you have to literally discard all of the laptops, all the desktops, and just kind of give them away.
Yeah, I have my youngest sister's 2009 iMac, which is this beautiful machined aluminum screen. The screen's still great, but the OS is useless. There's no upgrades. Correct. You can't really run anything on it. And it's a real shame that it's kind of a useless piece of hardware sitting in my garage. So it's nice now that, like you said, you can upgrade the peripherals, you can upgrade the screen, and for corporate use cases where it'd be easier to just have one at home and one at work than to have a laptop which could get lost or stolen in transit. That's security issues. And the PCB for this thing, it's about the size of an Apple TV.
Correct.
This probably explains why Raspberry Pis were so hard to get for a while.
Possibly. But one other thing that is fascinating is, so one of the things that I've been doing with a lot of old hardware is that I figure out a way to install Linux on it. And then I just start using them as, either machines that other, folks can use, or as home servers, or a simple thing like a NAS. They make for really handy machines that are very performant and don't have this OS obsolescence problem that happens with Mac OS or any other Windows machine that you see out there.
I've been using the last generation Mac Minis. The last generation Intel Mac Minis can be had refurbished on Amazon for less than 150. And those still, they're not on the latest version of Mac OS, but they're great. I was using one for Arduino because I was thinking, okay, I'm going to miswire the USB somehow, and I don't want to, I don't know, ruin my nice computers through some USB short, but I can afford to destroy this 12-year-old Mac Mini.
But the amazing thing is that the Macs actually have some really amazing hardware that will basically give you an alert on Mac OS that says something is wrong with your USB port, so we are shutting it down. Go figure out, what needs to be fixed before you plug the device back. So it can actually shut off the USB port so that you don't harm the rest of the hardware.
So how do we rate this Workspaces announcement? Looking at the details, I think we've covered all the details. It's Workspaces Thin Client is now in the US, Asia Pacific, Canada, Europe, and you can purchase the devices themselves on Amazon Business. Have you looked at how much they are?
No, I don't. Wait, the Workspaces Thin Client page.
Oh,
is
there
here.
it is. Okay, I just pulled it up on. I put it up on screen. $195. It looks very much
Like a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah. Certainly, there's some ARM hardware, a single a system on a chip with an HDMI out.
Correct.
It looks kind of like a cubic version of the Echo Dot.
Yep. Okay, another exciting week and another exciting release of a new Finder Fixer from CloudFix. So, Stephen, tell us what this latest Finder Fixer is all about.
So this is the Postgres Resize and Retype option of retyping to Graviton. So basically, we are optimizing your Postgres RDS and Aurora installation. So to give a bit of context, databases, they take up a big chunk of your application.
Aren't they one of the top 5, costs in any customer's AWS bill?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It is a big piece of that pie chart. And part of that is the production database. And you made a great point the other week. You have a production database, but then you also have all these other databases that show up over time to support the production database, right? Whether it be your dev, your staging, your test, your UAT, you have all these smaller databases to support the development of the production database. And you want them to be similar in terms of settings. So it's really easy to copy paste that CloudFormation template and put them there. Then what ends up happening is obviously your dev and test and UAT databases are not going to have the same utilization as your production database. Correct. And they don't need to be as performant or as big. And so you end up with this massive over provisioning. So what this Finder Fixer does, it looks at your database instances that are specifically running Postgres. So this is Aurora and RDS. And leveraging Compute Optimizer, we can resize and retype. So you can see it. I'll pull up this the screen in CloudFix, and you can go to the RDS Optimize Instances tab, or the Postgres Optimize Instances tab, and see right there, you can see the different options for it's showing you, okay, here's a running instance, here's your potential savings, and here's the retyping option. Now, one of the really exciting parts of this is that you can retype to Graviton. So speaking of ARM-based processors, we were speaking about the Amazon Workspaces earlier. What makes them so cheap is that they're running ARM-based processors. And Graviton is another AWS-developed ARM-based processor. Yeah. So with Graviton, you get between 15 and 40% price performance improvement. Graviton has been designed to be optimized for real-world workloads. And so now with this announcement of this Postgres Finder Fixer, we can retype your RDS or Aurora instances into to a Graviton that is sized appropriately. It still gives you sufficient headroom. Pretty conservative about that, but it's not wildly over provisioned.
And as I understand it, we actually use the Compute Optimizer under the hood to actually figure out these recommendations. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that way we can leverage AWS's expertise in that. They've seen millions upon millions of compute hours and seen exactly how the load has affected the memory, the network bandwidth. So we can use all of that knowledge, filter the recommendations to ones that we're very confident in, and present this as a list and make it that one-click easy, that execute where you can make this retyping happen.
Yeah, and I'm going to wear the Rick Ox hat for everyone who's new to this show. Rick Ox is the senior product manager for the Compute Optimizer team, and one of the things that he makes sure that he's reminding everyone whenever he's come on the show and spoken about Compute Optimizer is the fact that the Compute Optimizer is extremely conservative when it makes recommendations on resizing or retyping. And those conservative recommendations are to ensure that things don't break when you switch over. So they are safe. They are ensured to be safe. and therefore it becomes a no-brainer to switch over to these specific instance types as recommended by the computer optimizer.
Yeah, it's really neat, all the different factors that it takes into account. It's not just CPU and memory, but the usage of the EVS volumes, the throughput, all of the different factors that you'd want to consider. It looks at that within its giant, optimization stack of routines and surfaces recommendations that can save you money. And we filter those out. We want to make sure you're saving at least 15%, just to make sure we're not making changes willy-nilly. We make sure you're saving at least 15%, but then we surface those changes to you, so you don't have to go and hook up to the computer optimizer API yourself. We surface those changes for you, and you can just hit that execute button, and away you go. And it's a great way to save a huge amount on your database costs, and especially for both production workloads and these non-production copies of these workloads, which are really easy to over-provision. So that is our Finder fixture of the week, the Postgres RDS and Aurora optimizer, the instance optimizer. Check it out on the screen. You can see where the tabs are, and we have the accompanying blog post in the link to this in the description of this video.
Yeah, if you haven't checked it out, check it out immediately. If you're running a Postgres database or any of the other Aurora RDS databases, we've had a bunch of announcements over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Go check them out. Check out how you can save tons of money by making these optimizations executable with just a simple click. So go ahead and do that.
Yeah, you're not left out if you're on MySQL. We actually announced those last week. So MySQL, the same ones for MySQL, the instance resizing, the Graviton retyping. So it's really exciting. We can get your databases perfectly. I think about it like, when you get an Amazon package, and usually they're pretty good about their box selection, but occasionally you get one and you're just like, how did this happen? Right? You have a tiny little thing, an enormous amount of empty space, and it's like, this box is over provisioned. And so occasionally people over provision things or pick the wrong size for their need.
Right.
And this fixes that issue.
Exactly. So tons of money to be saved. Please go check it out. The links are all here on the screen. So let us know how beneficial this was to you. All
right. Well, with that, let's wrap up episode 91. This has been great. How's your week looking?
The week is busy but exciting. Again, lots of stuff happening on the AI front, and I am trying to absorb everything that's going on. So I will have more next week from all the learnings from this week, and looking forward to it. Lots of new models to try out, lots of new insights to learn.
I think it's time to do a sync up on our second brain systems, right? Where we're using AI to use the first brain to learn more about AI so we can use more AI. And it's hopefully a virtuous cycle of AI.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone, and have a great week. We will see you on Friday with Brian Huff.
See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.